Okay, so welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, if you were with us this morning, and welcome for the first time if you're just joining us for the LEVA-EU DLR launch, research launch event. We're going to be going on for a couple of hours now, talking with a panel of scientists about the implications of this work. But for now, for the first half hour, the team from DLR are going to present their research with perhaps a little more technical detail than they did this morning. So I'll leave it over to Stephan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session this afternoon for the presentation of our final report of the LEV for climate study. I take the opportunity to introduce a little bit, for those who don't know us, German Aerospace Center. Not only aerospace, we come from the transport program. We have several different activities here in, I have a little bit of echo here because aeronautics and aerospace, of course, but also energy and transport research, digitization, security, also on our focus. We are about a large organization, 9,000 people, 9,000 scientists, 55 facilities, organizational units in DLR, and we are coordinated by our ministry, which is since a few months named Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And climate action, of course, is one of our missions here. We are in a transport program obliged to look at our vision is for cost-effective transport modes for user-oriented vehicles. So, and in here we are at the topic user-oriented vehicles, like electric vehicles, which, as we will show, have a huge potential in our opinion to help us to reaching climate goals, to reaching them timely, to make a very efficient use of renewable energy, which is needed, besides other activities in, for instance, in the car or the freight vehicle sector. We are convinced that we need all of these measures, like avoid transport as far as we can, shift transport from, for instance, from road to rail, or also in this case from car transport like we used to know it, because the boundary conditions might be as they have been historic, but open a way to use light electric vehicles because they offer these benefits. So we are also, of course, looking for securing mobility. I mean, safety was a big topic in this in the morning already, and shaping this transformation, making this transformation happening. I think this is a big topic in this conference here today, because the framing conditions might not be there like we want to have it, and some potential to improve it. So I come to our background. We did some research on light electric vehicles in the last years. Some of you in the room or outside and online know the activities on the HEV-TCP, the technology collaboration program of the International Energy Agency. We had a task force here a couple of years, small electric vehicles, international format. Also colleagues from South Korea joined. We had this book published. We had an edited book. Thank you for your contributions. Several different authors there. It's open access. You can download it for free. Please have a look if you're interested. 25,000 downloads yet. Very good, I think. And we did some local studies, south of Germany, from a more local manufacturing perspective. And last but not least, we are doing technological research, like what the vehicle you see here. It's an let's say, almost L7E vehicle, which performs like an M1 vehicle from the safety perspective, of a completely new kind of constructing these vehicles. So this is the background which we have, and I'd like now to introduce the team, the research team, which did the study. And there is, first of all, Mascha. She did the project coordination. She's from her background, she's an engineer. And the designer, yes, both. There is Mirko, who, with the background as an economist, who did the analysis of the trip potential. There's Simone, some 20 years of LCA experience. She's an ecologist. And the colleagues not in the room, Laura Gebhardt, she contributed very much to the study from an economical point of view. Ishika from a technical point of view, and Robert also for illustrations. So thank you very much, and I hand over the floor to Mascha to present us the results. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon also from my side. We are really happy to present the study here in the science session. For those who joined in the session this morning already, we will repeat many slides, but we also added some additional slides to go a little bit more into detail of our study and how we evaluated the potential of light electric vehicles for climate protection through substitution for passenger car trips. And we chose Germany as a case study for evaluating that potential. I will first give an introduction to light electric vehicles and explain the scope and also the approach to our study, how we evaluated the potential. And then Mirko Goletz will explain the trip substitution potential, and Simone Ehrenberger will show the results of the emission calculation. And then I will sum it up at the end. So when we started this study, we had a look at the greenhouse gas emissions from the German transport sector. Transport makes up around 20% of Germany's greenhouse gas emissions, so it's one of the large emitters. And you can see here the composition, and marked in red, you see the emissions from the passenger car trips that make up almost 2/3 of the emission. So this share is really considerable, and it means it offers large potential for reductions. And there are mainly 3 options to reduce the emissions from the trips. First, as Stephan Schmid already said, you can avoid trips, then you can shift trips to other more sustainable modes of transport, like public transport, for example, or light electric vehicles, and then you can improve vehicles. And currently, this is happening for cars by substituting the propulsion technology. We substitute the internal combustion engine with electric drives. And one could ask if this is not enough for climate protection, if we really need to go beyond that. And the answer is yes, we need to go beyond that, because even though electric cars cause fewer emissions than those with internal combustion engine, and even if we could use 100% renewable energy, which we cannot today in Germany, we do not have even half of the electric energy generated from renewable sources, still we have problems also with renewable energy. For example, by mining of critical raw materials. And we need these materials for the generation, transmission, and the storage of electrical energy. So we must find a way to minimize energy consumption and to maximize energy efficiency. And this means we need to go beyond a mere substitution of the drivetrain technology. But this also means profound changes are necessary to make mobility sustainable, which is very challenging. And on the other hand, if we miss climate protection targets, the changes will also be very profound. Before I come to the study itself, I would like to introduce you to a range of light electric vehicles. or LEVs as they are abbreviated. The term covers a wide variety of vehicles, which you can see here with examples to give you a better impression. On the left side, you see an electric scooter. Then we have an electric bike, which saw a huge success on the market in the last years. I mean, in general, not this model, but all electric bikes. And then we have a cargo bicycle, we have electric mopeds, and we have electric motorcycles, and something that we call microcars. You see that with 4 examples here on the right side. So we have very different vehicles under this term of LEVs, and we have vehicles with rather low speed, around 20 or 25 kilometers per hour, and we have vehicles with high speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour or almost 100. For example, we have this Microlino here with the 90 kilometers per hour, or the Nobi with 128. Most vehicles you see here are on the market, or they will be on the market soon. So why is it worth evaluating the potential of light electric vehicles? Like the name already suggests, they are lightweight, and that means that you can save energy for propulsion. If you compare the weight between a typical LEV, a heavier one, a microcar, then it has around 500 kilograms. In comparison, an average new car in Germany in 2020 had a weight of 1,600 kilograms. That is 3 times more than the LEV. And the heavier the car, the more energy you need for moving the car itself and not the passengers or goods. In Germany, we have an average occupancy rate of 1.4 persons per car, which is only around 100 kilograms then. And you see this energy consumption and the advantage of the LEVs also in the chart on the right side. We compare an e-bike, a microcar, and a battery electric car. And as we have very different vehicles within each category, we show a range of energy consumption with these blue bars. They indicate the amount of energy that you need per 100 kilometers. And it's clear that the LEVs need considerable less energy than the electric car. And the less energy you need, the less energy you need to produce, and that is symbolized by this wind power plants here. If you need not so much energy to move the car and the passenger and goods, then you could use smaller batteries. This is very important because the batteries are made out of critical raw materials partly, and also the production of batteries is related to greenhouse gas emissions. And the emissions are proportional to the size and capacity of the battery, which is shown in the graph on the left side. We again compare 3 different categories, again, an e-bike, a microcar, and a battery electric car, and you clearly see the high amount of emissions that you need for a large battery. Another aspect of LEVs is the small footprint. That was not scope of our study, but still we would like to mention it because it also offers great opportunities for city planning and efficient use of space. And you can see that with the graph here on the right side. So despite their positive properties, LEVs still lead a niche existence on the market on one side, but also in research and on the political agenda. And that's why we evaluated with our study the research questions: to what extent might LEVs substitute car chips, and related to this, how much CO2 equivalents might be saved with LEVs. And I will now show you the approach, how we investigated these questions. You can see it here at one glance, the complete process. I will go step by step through it, and Simone and Mirko will add details with their slides. So first we started with a definition of an exemplary set of LEVs. And we also defined analysis criteria for the trip substitution. And then we took a representative national travel survey from Germany, which describes an average day in Germany. And on this basis, we analyzed which car trips could be substituted, and also important, with which kind of LEVs it could be substituted. In most cases, a car trip cannot be only substituted by one type of LEVs, but by several. For example, an electric moped or motorcycle or a microcar. And then when we knew how, after this analysis, we knew how many trips could be substituted, and connected to this also how many vehicle kilometers could be substituted. And this is really important because the emissions relate to the number of vehicle kilometers rather than the number of trips. So I come to the calculation of the emissions of the vehicles. That's in the second row here. First, we determined the CO2 equivalent emissions of the different LEV categories, and also of cars with different propulsion technology. And then for each trip that we found is substitutable, we choose the one LEV with the lowest emissions. Then we could calculate the difference for each trip. So we calculated the difference between the CO2 equivalent emissions from a car compared to a trip with an LEV. And in the end, we aggregated the emissions of all trips, and we scaled it up to 1 year as we did the analysis for one average day. We would like to point out that we did not evaluate changes in mobility behavior, as well not social acceptance, and also no political measures. The evaluation of our study shows the basic potential, and further studies then should follow in order to evaluate these also very important aspects. So here you can see the 9 LEV categories we used for our analysis. First, an e-scooter, then we have an electric bike that goes up to 25 kilometers per hour. We have a vehicle we call e-bike plus that allows for cargo, also transport of children. Up to 3 children could be transported here. Then we have a speed pedelec that has a maximum design speed of 45 kilometers per hour, a moped with the same speed, a motorcycle with a speed of 120 kilometers per hour, and then we have 3 different types of microcars, one with 3 wheels, which has a maximum speed of 125 kilometers per hour, and 2 with 4 wheels, which are 45 and 90 kilometers per hour. They are in this order because they are classified as different categories according to the EU regulation 168 from 2013. And this regulation limits the speed of the vehicles L6E and L7E, but it does not limit the speed for L5E. The speed we show here was chosen by us for the study. And for each category, we chose an exemplary LEV model, which is now available on the market or will soon be available on the market. And we took the technical parameters from these vehicles for the analysis of the trip substitution potential and also of the emission reduction. Here you can see an overview of the properties that we used for the analysis. We have, on the one side, parameters that influence the trip substitution, and then we have parameters we need for the calculation of the CO2 equivalent emissions. Partly we derived the parameter, as I said, from exemplary models that we choose that would apply, for example, for the battery capacity or the weight of the vehicles. And then we have other parameters that we defined. We did this by a review of literature and also in discussion with other experts. An example for this kind of parameter would be the relevant travel distance. That's a distance that we defined to be well rideable with an LEV for the different categories. I will go through the numbers of one category, and then I think the principle will be clear. I choose the electric bike as an example. It has a maximum speed of 25 kilometers per hour with electrical support. The relevant travel distance in our analysis was defined as 15 kilometers for one way and for a round trip with 30. So that would mean, for example, you travel 15 kilometers in the morning to work and 15 back again. For the number of occupants, that's obviously 1 for a bike. Trip purpose was defined as the e-bike is suitable for all purposes, excluding accompaniment of person and also excluding some shopping purposes, for example, for very large objects. The maximum the street category was all kind of streets, excluding highways, because obviously you cannot go on highways with an e-bike. And the maximum age of the driver we defined with 70 for all two-wheeled vehicles. Of course, there will be people older than 70 that also could ride on an e-bike, but we wanted to be on the conservative side here. Then we also included weather conditions and impairments. We said with impairments, you cannot use an e-bike for our study. Again, there will be impairments where you can use an e-bike, but we wanted to, again, be on the conservative side here. So we excluded those trips. And the battery capacity, the technical range is 120 kilometers for the e-bike. You see here that it's much more than what we defined as relevant travel distance. We have a battery capacity of 400 watt hours, of course. Energy consumption, a weight of 25 kilograms, and energy consumption of 300 watt hours per 100 kilometers, and a lifetime mileage of 50,000 kilometers. Yeah, and then I hand over to Mirko for the trip substitution potential.
Yeah, thank you, Mascha. So I would like to speak about the trip substitution potential. For those who haven't been here, repeat basically what I have taught in the morning. Under trip substitution potential, we understand the amount of kilometers that cars currently drive that we can replace by LEVs. So firstly, I'm going to talk about the database that we used to derive this trip substitution potential. So to do so, we used the German National Travel Household Survey, which is called MID in its most recent version from 2017. MID is a quite large data set that comprises all regions in Germany, from rural areas up to the city level, with about 960,000 trips that was included at 316,000 people and about 150,000 households. And the data set includes not only information about trips typical for such surveys, but also includes socioeconomic information such as the income, the amount of people living in a household, the housing situation, and also what kind of car is available in such a household. And yeah, by using MID, we can create some sort of a picture of the day-to-day mobility in Germany, and therefore we can use it to derive the substitution potential. And yeah, let us take a look on how the mobility situation in Germany currently looks like as in relation to car trips. So the car is the most relevant mode of transport in Germany. About 57% of all trips in Germany are currently carried out by cars. Despite many trips are quite short, 80% are below 20 kilometers and 98% are even below 100 kilometers. And even though many cars have seating capacity for 4 to 5 people, the occupancy rate is usually quite low. 1.4 people on average are seated in a car. And so what can we do with this to derive the trip substitution potential? Mascha just introduced to the different kind of vehicles that we included in our study, the LEVs. And what we did was we looked on each and every trip in MID and checked whether it's suitable to be replaced by LEVs. And to do so, we went through different criteria that we previously defined. And these criteria are listed here on the left-hand side. So we looked on the length of the trip and the purpose of the trip. We also looked whether the driver had the appropriate age to be in our understanding, able to drive such a vehicle. We looked on the weather, we looked whether the person has some sort of impairments, and also how many people have actually carried out such a trip. And then we compared all these criteria and looked whether each and every LEV is suitable. So here, for instance, in that example, where we choose an e-bike plus, which is the e-bike that can carry up to 1 person and 3 children, having an exemplary trip that is 8 kilometers long, we see that the e-bike plus would be suitable because it's a 15-kilometer single trip that we assumed for it. We considered e-bike plus to be suitable for commuting. The age was matching. However, in the case here that I'm showing, the weather was snowfall for that trip, so in that case we would have excluded the trip as we did for all of the other two-wheelers, and it was snowy or icy conditions. Yeah, and doing this for Germany, we derived the substitution potential, and here I'm showing the results of that. So on the left-hand side, we see how many trips can actually be substituted by LEVs, like on the upper boundary, and we see that about 76% of all trips could theoretically be replaced using LEVs based on the approach that I just described. And of course, looking on e-scooters who have a much narrower way of being used, this is only 6%, but then subsequently going to a larger vehicles, have more tires and have more power, are faster and more seating capacity. We finally end up at 75% for the microcar 125. And looking on the mileage that we can substitute, that is on the right-hand side, we see that we can replace about 50% of the total mileage that is driven in Germany currently by cars by LEVs. Again, e-scooters, of course, have a smaller share, whereas larger vehicles tend to having a bigger share of that. And the reasoning behind the mileage being lower than the trips is simply that cars are used often also for longer trips, like those going above 100 kilometers, and we had to exclude these trips from our substitution potential because we considered LEVs not to be suitable. But still, the key finding here is 50% of the mileage, which is relevant for the carbon dioxide emissions, could be replaced by LEVs in Germany. So I would like to hand over to Simone, who's going to tell us how what that means for the emissions.
Thank you. So we now identified the trips that can be substituted, but what does that mean for emission reduction potential? So to calculate this, we first have to set our system boundaries. And we not only considered the vehicle operation, but we also considered the vehicle production of the vehicles, and not only of the LEVs, of the passenger cars as well, of course. And we also included the fuel and electricity production. And as a reference for the passenger car market, we referred to a 2030 scenario, which also in Germany implies a higher share of battery electric vehicles, for example, and also the electricity mix will change within the next years up to 2030. We did not include the end of life of the vehicles, but basically this is a cradle to gate approach in that sense. When we look at the vehicle production for the light electric vehicles, we built a model to calculate the greenhouse gas emissions for every single type or category of LEV. And main influencing factors, of course, are the materials that are used for the vehicle and also the battery that is used and the capacity of the battery. So if you have a larger battery, of course, this has a large impact on the overall vehicle production emissions. But still, of course, this is less compared to a mid-class passenger car battery electric vehicle. And if we want to analyze the emission reduction potential for our trips, of course, we need to know what is the greenhouse gas emissions per kilometer. So we include not only the vehicle production, but also the vehicle operation and electricity emissions that are needed to drive the vehicle. And for the passenger cars, of course, There are also some conventional cars still in the market in 2030, so they also emit greenhouse gases or CO2 during vehicle operation. And another influencing factor, of course, is the overall lifetime mileage, which Mascha also already explained. And when we consider the trips that we replace, we have an average emission for the LEV fleet of 24 grams of greenhouse gases per kilometer versus the average passenger car emits around 200 grams of greenhouse gas emissions per kilometer. So LEVs have only about 12% of that passenger car emissions. And if we analyze our overall substituted trips, when we do those trips with passenger cars, we get to emissions of 130 million tons per year. And if we only have the LEVs on these trips, we can reduce this amount of emissions by 44%, which is considerable, I think. And most of this potential comes from smaller LEVs, but also microcars and motorcycles. They play also a major role. And we analyzed this for an average day in Germany, and if we assume like that this happens throughout the year, the absolute amount of emission reduction is 57 million tons of greenhouse gases per year, which it already includes the production of the material. So this is not only transport emission as such, if you think in sectoral categories. And what we conclude from our calculations will be presented by Mascha now.
Thank you. Yeah, then I will summarize our results. As Simone just said, we found that up to 44% of the CO2 equivalent emissions could, in theory, be saved by replacing 3/4 of the car trips in Germany, and that would mean that half of the kilometers would be replaced with LEVs for saving this amount of CO2 equivalent emissions. In total numbers, that would be 57 tons CO2 equivalent per year. If we just look at the trips substituted by LEVs, then we would have a reduction of 88% of the emissions. So that relates to the number of 12%, what Simone just said. The LEVs need only 12%, or they emit only 12% of the greenhouse gases compared to cars, so we save 88%. And these figures are sufficiently high to suggest that further research into this topic is likely to be worth pursuing. Again, we would like to point out that we did not take into account any social or political or acceptance aspects or mobility behavior changes, but these are very important topics, of course, and should be addressed by other studies. If we have a look at the results, 75% of the substitution of trips might seem very high, but if you keep in mind that 80% of the trips are shorter than 20 kilometers, then this result is plausible. If you would like to play around a little bit with the numbers, we have an online tool where you can discover various scenarios. There you can vary, for example, the lifetime mileage or the relevant travel distance and see how that influences the results. Yeah, it is clear that in order to achieve even parts of the emissions, of the potential that we found, that you need fundamental changes then. These changes should encourage people to change from car trips to LEV trips, but this means also you need to switch from long-standing habits, which is not easy. And therefore, measures that encourage this should include push and pull measures. Yeah, LEVs are not a standalone solution, but they should work together with many approaches, of course, together with public transport, with walking, with cycling, and with long-distance trains, and also with cars for some trips. So all in all, that should support the approach to avoid trips, to shift trips to more sustainable modes, and to improve the vehicles that we use. Yeah, as a conclusion, we think that the potential that we found the potential of LEVs to support climate change mitigation is really significant. And this promise suggests that further investigation is urgently called for, and further investigation should also include social, ecological, economic safety and planning implications. Examples for research questions would be: what kind of specific changes are necessary in order to realize at least parts of the potential that was found by this study? And how could we change transport systems and adapt them so that LEV safety can be maximized? And also, how can we adapt the vehicles to increase the safety? LEVs, as mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, also offers opportunities for urban planning, which could be an interesting subject of studies. And important is, how can adoption of LEVs be accelerated, because we don't have time to wait with measures to protect our climate. Climate change doesn't wait for us, and so we need to act fast. Yeah, without fundamental changes in many fields, we think that LEV's potential will not be extensively realized. That means there's a lot of work to do, but the potential is really promising. Yeah, thank you for your attention, and then we would answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Okay, so if there are any questions of scientific fact after that deep treatment of this, we shall take them now. Can we wait until the microphone arrives with you, please?
Thank you. It's a question that comes to everybody's mind at the moment of the big choice: what do we buy? And I would like to just remind you that there is a hybrid solution, and presently it is very much accepted by the public, by the consumers, and it's a very good market sector. Hybrid, they say, okay, we got both. So is it to consider in the framework of this kind of vehicle? One. Second, is it to arise a transitional solution which can help to go to straightforward electric and only electric vehicles? Or do you consider this hybrid solution as a sustainable, permanent model choice? Just, well, one of them. Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should introduce the scientific panel now, because a number of the points the lady mentioned are relevant there.